Right, it's about time for the recap of the third episode, or the third session of the RuneQuest project campaign. I particularly loved this session. It took place on Sunday the 1st of June, so that's 2 weeks ago. And really, when it comes down to it, that session is exactly the reason I like role-playing, and exactly the reason I particularly like RuneQuest. It was a role-playing session. A sword was not drawn, no violence ensued, though it came pretty close on a couple of occasions. And one of those occasions, had something happened, it would have been character-on-character violence. So the session was full of a lot of character development, a lot of tension, but also too, while the characters had their moments and they were sort of developing and evolving and reacting to each other, what was really, really good to see was that players were working with each other in order to tell the story. So the players weren't positioning their characters and saying, God damn it, that's the way it's going to act, and bugger you, and so forth and so on. It was a lot of nuance going on between the players, a lot of give and take, and in times there was actually discussions about, well, what's the best way to resolve the situation we're in, or resolve the situation our characters are in, that progresses the story and makes it fun for everybody. So really mature role-playing. I absolutely loved it. It's exactly why I role-play. So what happened? It's a little bit fractured. The party split off in a number of different groups and activities, all within Apple Lane, so all within the space of a couple of hours. So it was all happening around and amongst each other, and so there's a lot of intertwining of stories and that sort of thing. But the curtain raises, if you like, on Gillette. Now, if you remember on the previous episode, we had killed those dragon newts, and we had found out there was a bounty on them because they were known to particularly target lunar troops. So we got in contact with the local garrison, who sent a file of soldiers and a centurion or an officer down to Apple Lane to investigate, to ensure that we had actually killed these murderous brigands and terrorists, and to give us our bounty if that was in fact the case. It was in fact the case. We did get paid our bounty. The Lunars pronounced themselves very satisfied and were looking forward to working with us in the future. Then they went home. So that happened the previous session. Now, why we ended up talking to the Lunars was that the sheriff suggested it. The sheriff said, hey look, I think there's bounty on these guys. I'll go and get the Lunars and you guys can sort it all out. So Gillette was sort of wondering, well, okay, so what's the relationship between the sheriff and the Lunars? The sheriff is one of the local clansmen. He's been in Apple Lane for a long, long time. But is he a collaborator? What's the relationship? Where's all this going to sort of go in terms of who can you trust and that sort of thing? So Gillette goes to the sheriff's house. The sheriff isn't there, but fortunately his son-in-law Enos is there. And a discussion ensues, and Gillette basically asks him, what's the sheriff like, and what's the nature of the relationship between the sheriff and the Lunars? The lad said that sheriff is a well-liked and well-respected man amongst the villagers, and is generally looked up to and has the regard of his charges. Now, he you could say that, well, what's the son-in-law gonna say? We haven't got any independent corroboration on that one just yet, but wait and see, it's information. The issue about the relationship between the sheriff and the Lunars, Enos puts like this, is that the sheriff knows the villagers. He's lived amongst them. This is his hometown. The sheriff is pro-starter independence, doesn't like the Lunas there. Really is a case of, if he had it his way, the Lunas would be gone. But the reality is the Lunas are there. So the sheriff is there, Drolon, I think his name was, is there to act as sort of a bit of a buffer between the villagers who are anti-Luna and the Luna occupation force. As Enos said, you know, if the sheriff just quit his job and disappeared off into the woods to join the freedom fighters, who's going to replace him? And it's quite likely that whoever replaces him will be replaced by someone the Lunas approve of, and so will be a Luna stool pigeon, or some sort of real collaborator. And that's not going to help the villagers, and that's not going to help the cause. So Drolon stays there as the sheriff, working with the occupation forces as he needs to, but only as he needs to, but that allows him to protect the villagers. And, you know, I think Enos really has got a good point there. I find it difficult to critique the sheriff on his particular choice. It's something I can imagine, you know, I would do if I was in that sort of situation. So, end that scene and move on to the second scene. And the second scene starts with his mirror, our Minotaur Shalana Arroy Healer. She had been approached by the horsemaster's wife because young Freddy has been ill. He's been very, very ill. And can Hizmera find out what the problem is and heal the young lad? So Hizmera goes to the horsemaster's hall, takes a look at the chap, young Freddy, and yes, Freddy is definitely sick. He has contracted a case of the chills, which is a constitution attacking disease, and that means almost certainly he is possessed by a disease spirit, which poses a bit of a problem for Hizmera. Hizmera can heal the effects of disease, but she can't actually heal the disease itself. In other words, she can't exorcise this possessing spirit. But who can? Mr. Grip, of course. So Mr. Grip, our friendly troll shaman. So Hizmera goes and sends Baldrina, her acolyte come henchwoman, to come off and find Mr. Grip, who's searching for bits and pieces off in the woods. Baldrina finds Mr. Grip, and together they go back to the horsemaster's hall, where Hizmera explains the situation to Mr. Grip. Mr. Grip, using his second sight, sees that yes, indeed, a spirit is possessing young Freddy, and you know, volunteers to do the right, proper, and decent thing, which is to engage this spirit in spirit combat and destroy it, or exorcise it, or get rid of it, in order for Hizmera to then work her skills and heal young Freddy. Now, I go to inform people that in my broken and uneasy starter ride, that yes, I can do something about it, that there is a disease spirit there, and I am confident that I can overcome it because it's not a very powerful one. But unfortunately, you know, lost in translation problems, and I apparently end up telling him, well, I meant to go, evil spirit, I eat the evil spirit, I eat. But what the mother had heard was, I eat, while I was pointing at young Freddy. So that didn't exactly have the effect I desired, as the mother saw this 7-foot troll pointing at her young boy and saying, I will eat him. So, you know, Mr. Grip, again, influencing people, not so much winning friends. Hizmera, though, intercedes, steps in and translates basically what I mean, so Freddy's mother is a little bit less distressed, shall we say. So it was agreed or decided that I would take Freddy and the mother into the woods with his mirror, so I can have a bit of privacy to do what I need to do, whilst BLOODSPORRRT look after Freddy's siblings. I think he had something like 6 or 7 brothers and sisters, and BLOODSPORRRT ended up teaching them some important life lessons, such as how to hog-tie one another. Now, when we went off to begin to deal with young Freddy, I didn't actually realise really how dodgy that would have looked when you have a minotaur and a troll leading a human child and mother off into the deep woods. So once this was pointed out, much hilarity ensued, and many jokes were made about takeaway food. So we go off into the woods, and I perform a discorporate, which is an hour ritual, and go off and engage the spirit in spirit combat. Now, of course, the other thing about discorporating and so forth is that when a shaman discorporates, his fetch materializes on the middle world and acts as a guardian over the unconscious and insensible form of the shaman as he or she is lying there. Now, what is my fetch? It is a 6-foot hairy black shadowy spider, which again really didn't do much for the mother's peace of mind. By this stage, Freddy is so sick he was out of it. But the mother was, the mother was not a happy woman. Let's just leave it at that. So I discorporated, made my spirit travel roll quite comfortably, so that meant I could immediately find the spirit, engage the spirit in spirit combat, totally blasted it out of the water, figuratively speaking, and then returned back to my body. Now, we made the spirit roll, even though Mr. Grip is literally only about 1 metre or maybe 2 metres, 3 metres at most away from young Freddy. He still had to make a spirit travel roll, because certainly the way that Ox, the Games Master, and I conceptualise the spirit realm is that it is unworldly. There is no, the sense of distance works differently in the spirit world than it does in the middle world. So distance is a function of, if you like, meterage in the middle world, but in the spirit world, distance is more a function of time. So, you could wax Einsteinian here and talk about time and space-time and all that sort of stuff, but our basic conception is that there is a bit of a rendering of that intimate connection between space and time in the spirit world. But anyway, so metaphysics aside, the young lad's healed, and or not healed, but the spirit is exorcised. His mirror and the mother take the boy back to the Horsemaster's Hall, where everyone is absolutely ecstatic and happy and so forth, and his mirror is very much the hero of the hour. I did all the work, but his mirror gets all the attention and recognition. But so be it. She probably needs it. And it probably, again, didn't help when Mr. Grip, as he returned, told Freddy's mother in very blunt terms, anyone else, spirit, evil spirit, I eat spirit. And then left. So I'm not quite sure what word is going to get round the villages about all that. because again you have this huge, forbidding, not very friendly troll being very trollish, but at the same time doing a good thing and saving this young boy's life. So yeah, what's going to happen? What's going to happen next? To be explored. So Mr. Grip then leaves the Horsemaster's Hall, and he's going back off into the woods because he's looking for a trollkin, which hangs around in the woods and every once in a while comes into town for a drink at the Tin Inn. And Mr. Grip particularly wants to find this trollkin and have a nice little talk to him, you know, Uzco on Enlow. So he goes off and does that. End of that particular scene. Third scene is that that Naimh, who is one of the real Sartorite patriots, who, you know, extraordinarily anti-lunar. Now she has heard about, because she was out of town when the Lunars were here, but she had heard that perhaps Gillette was just being a little bit matey with the lunar forces. So she goes off and catches up with Enos, also to find out a little bit more about what happened when the Lunars came to town, and in particular, what was the relationship between Gillette and the hated Red Army scum. And I can't help but be very aware of the parallels of Gillette asking the same sorts of questions about the sheriff and his relationship to the Lunars. But this time it's Naimh, one of our characters. And Naimh and Enos have a long discussion, and basically what Naimh takes away from all that is that Gillette had promised to assist the occupation forces, and so in Naimh's mind Gillette had become a lunar sympathiser. It isn't actually what Enos said, but it is what Naimh heard, and she was not best pleased. In fact, she was rather annoyed, and by annoyed I mean she was ready to cut Gillette's throat, and stomps off to find Gillette and demands an explanation and or blood, not necessarily in that order. So that's the end of that scene. On to the fourth scene. While all that was going on, Gillette had made his way from the sheriff's house down to the Swordsmaster's Hall and introduced himself to the Swordsmaster Justin and his one-armed assistant Navarok. Now, the Swordmaster is himself a sword of Hummuct, a Hummuct rune lord, and Gillette is on the cusp of becoming a rune lord. And in fact, he in the game week following, he's going to go to Boldholm and undergo the initiation into rune lord status at the temple there. So he's right on the cusp. So, and decides to go and visit the local senior Hummucti to introduce himself, do the right thing, and, you know, perhaps start up a professional or even a personal relationship and friendship with the chap. You know, just out of respect for him and the situation that Justin the position Justin occupies. So that was his intention. It didn't actually work out quite the way that Gillette wanted, but that made for a lot of fun times with the rest of us. So Justin himself was polite enough, but as the conversation developed, it became very, very obvious that Navarok, Justin's assistant, who was there at the time, had an instant hate-on for Gillette. Again, it took a bit of a while for the story to come out, but essentially the reason is this, is that Navarok has one arm, and the reason he had one arm was that he lost his arm fighting the lunar forces during one of the rebellions not so long ago. And in this particular rebellion, the Gracelanders were acting as auxiliaries for the lunar forces, and who should actually chop off his arm, but a Grayslander. So as far as Navarok is concerned, all Grayslanders are turncoat treacherous scum who do not deserve to breathe. Because not only did he lose his arm, he couldn't grow his arm back, which meant he could never become a sort of humact in game terms. The rules would allow it, you know, the rules that we play by would allow it, but within the game world, he just never could develop his left-handed skills and good enough, fast enough, so forth, to become a sort of humact. And so he had an immense amount of bitterness around that. And Gillette, being a Grayslander who served the same queen that fought with the Lunars, and on the verge of becoming that which Navarok could never ever be, meant all Navarok's bitterness really came to the fore. And for quite a while, Gillette tries to be polite and be understanding with Navarok, but Navarok's constant insults and needlings finally sort of get to Gillette, and after a while Gillette and Navarok are trading insults, each giving as good as they're getting. And finally Navarok calls into question Gillette's fitness to become a sort of humact, and weapons are that far away from being drawn, as that's an insult, of course, that Gillette cannot let lie, when Justin intervenes and diffuses the situation, using his authority, his mana, if you like, to de-escalate everything, whether or not Gillette and Navarok actually wanted this situation to de-escalate. So Navarok storms off in a huff, and leaving Gillette to finish off the conversation with Justin about things humacty, as well as trying to find out a little bit more about these dragon newts. And what Justin informs them is that these dragon newts were deliberately targeting lunar patrols and lunar supply wagons and lunar messengers and so forth and so on. They were making themselves a thorn on the side of occupation forces. And as a result, their deaths may not sit well with certain gentlemen of Justin's acquaintance. And in fact, you know, the party has not done themselves any favours by killing them off. But as Gillette sharply retorted, and I think he had a really good point on this one, is that Gringle is not a lunar sympathiser, and that the Dragon Newt band had obviously teamed up with the baboons, probably for pay, and really at the end of the day, what happened was that Gillette hired better people. Gringle hired better people, and so that's the end of the story. Justin nods his head sagely and says, yeah, that could well be appreciated if put to certain people in that sort of context. And basically finishes off the conversation there, wishing Gillette all the very best for his upcoming instalment as a sort of humact, and suggests that they perhaps meet later on in the evening at the Tin Inn for a friendly drink. And Gillette absolutely, with pleasure, accepts and agrees to meet him at the pub in a couple of hours' time. Actually, no, I do have to put in something else there. There was another lovely little exchange. Gillette and Navarok were having their insults. Navarok storms off. Gillette says something about calls off after him. You know, if you're a better swordsman, you would have learned how to parry and you wouldn't be in this situation. So that almost causes a sword drawn, but Justin intercedes and basically tells Gillette, you're a snot-nosed little shit. respect your elders. We've seen more of the world than you are likely ever to do so, and we're killing men while you're still crapping in your nappies. And we have grown old in the profession of arms because we know our shit, and you've still got to earn your, earn respect yourself. So just, wind your head in, young man. However, you should do well. Just learn your place, and yeah, I'll buy you a drink a bit later on. No hard feelings, mate. So that's the end of that scene, and now we're coming up to the scene that I really, really, really wish I was a good storyteller for, because this is the confrontation between Gillette and Naimh, and all sorts of great conversation comes out of this. I'll just give you the bare bones because there's no point trying to recount the detail, in part because I can't remember it, and in part because I just couldn't do it justice. But basically what it really comes down to is Naimh storms in and says, I don't like the way that you were dealing with the Lunars. Gillette replies, what didn't you like exactly? Naimh replies, well, you said it was a pleasure dealing with them. What do you mean by that? And bang, 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 argument. And things get increasingly heated and increasingly personal. Gillette points out that, well, what's he going to do? Attack a whole file of lunar soldiers, including Yanafel Tunnel's Rune Lord. What's that going to do for the villages of Apple Lane? Get real. Naimh doesn't really like that all that much. It doesn't like his tone of voice. And so things get increasingly heated. Again, some fantastic role-playing, some really barbed comments passing between the character of Naimh and Gillette. And the problem here ends up being is that the players end up talking their characters into a corner. And it really was the case of, if the characters were going to maintain the integrity as individuals and as real people, a sword would be drawn and the two players would end up fighting each other through their two characters. And that's not something anyone wanted. So we sort of just called a little bit of a pause to the characters' activities while the players sort of sat down and amongst ourselves discussed where to from here. How can we navigate our way through this situation so everyone remains true to their character? And so we probably spent about 10 minutes discussing what would happen next and what couldn't happen next. And if you did this, well, I'll probably have to draw my sword because of that. So I won't do that, I'll do this. And again, it was just fantastic. Really, really loved it. Even though we had to sort of push pause on the character scene, the player scene, the player development and the player negotiation was brilliant. Hats off to Gillette, hats off to Naimh, and hats off to Ox, the games master. Brilliant stuff. So in the end, everything de-escalates and a peace of sorts breaks out between the Sartorite faction, which is Naimh, Calonde and Oshin, and on the one side, and Gillette on the other side, who's obviously had a really shit day, having been taken to task and almost got into a fight at the Swordmaster's Hall, and then half an hour later having to find himself in the same position with Naimh. So I think Gillette was having a real no good day. And so the scene closes there and we go our separate ways. And there are two more scenes to go, and I'll just quickly go over them as fast as I can because it's already almost half an hour, 25 minutes into it. It seems the shorter the gameplay, the longer my recounting is. But anyway, so the next scene the next two scenes really deal with Mr. Grip. the next scene is Mr. Grip finally catches up with the Trollkin, catches him, and whilst Mr. Grip in his own trollish world would have terrorised the Trollkin and brutalised him until he got the information he was looking for out of him, Mr. Grip played it differently in this particular context because Mr. Grip is alone and he is aware that he needs to earn goodwill from everyone that he possibly can at the moment, and he's not very good at it. Witness what happened with the baboons that he misunderstood, which he took care of instead of looked after, and also the way that he terrorised young Freddy's mother. So Mr. Grip realises he's not a people person, and so rather than trying to brutalise this Trollkin to get the information, realising the Trollkin is known by the villagers and is sort of like a mascot to them, he tries a different tact and captures the Trollkin, grabs him, walks him into the pub, sits him down and feeds him full of food and drink, to which the Trollkin rather worriedly asks, "Are you trying to marinate me?" Much laughter ensues. So after trying to find out whether the Trollkin knew anything about any Malia cultists, basically where did that disease spirit come from, because my character has got a passionate hatred of Malia cultists in particular, but instead ends up hearing a different story about where this Trollkin came from. This Trollkin originally was one of the soldier Trollkin that was in White Eye the Bandits gang. Now, he was one of White Eye's best Trollkin, but during a raid on a lunar outpost, he got separated and then captured by the Lunars, who then took him off to Latafunda, so a slave plantation. And while he was at the slave plantation, these 3 Lunars who were wearing masks of the moon used to come in and cast spells at him, and over a period of time he became smaller and weaker, and eventually becoming shriveled and shrunken, and eventually he managed to escape, but he was never the Trollkin he ever was. So going from a proud warrior Trollkin, as proud as Trollkin can ever be, to the snivelling wretch who lives on the outskirts of a human village. So I can understand becoming weaker in terms of a lack of strength and a lack of constitution due to bad food and abuse and overwork and that sort of thing. But the whole thing about a lack of size, because the Trollkin specifically mentioned he shrunk, has me a little bit confused, and I'm not sure what that means yet, but I have been sort of thinking about it. We did identify the ringleader, and the ringleader is the senior lunar administrator in the area. So it's the Centurion's boss, who was the ringleader. So that's one bit of information I got from him. The other bit of information is that he used to work for White Eye, and White Eye is a troll bandit who lives in a set of caves about a day's travel from Apple Lane, and he makes himself a nuisance. And I know as a player, I know Rainbow Mounds is the continuation of Apple Lane, but Mr. Grip is thinking a troll with a Trollkin horde in a set of caverns. That sounds a lot like home. All I have to do is get rid of the troll, and the Trollkin will do what they're bloody well told. So talk to the Trollkin a bit more about it, and discover a couple of frightening things. One of which is that White Eye has a troll witch as an offsider, and that troll witch knows dragon magic and has little dragons. So again, I'm not entirely certain what that means, but it does mean that the published scenario is not being closely followed. So yeah, what are we going to do with that? Well, I know what Mr. Grip wants to do with all that. So all he has to do is just talk the rest of the band into following him to the Rainbow Mounds and beating up a troll. But that's a story for another day. Okay. End that scene and on to the last scene. And the last scene happens the next day. And I basically, once people start getting up, Mr. Grip goes and approaches Oisin and says in his trollish manner, I wish to hire you and your men, meaning the rest of the band, for a job. Should take 1 day, shouldn't be any fighting, but I need you to lead horses and load the horses because the horses are afraid of me. Why wouldn't the horses be? And also I need Naimh because Naimh knows the way to the bandits' hideout, the Dragon Youth's hideout, and that's where Mr. Grip wants to go. So I agreed to pay them 50 lunars a day, which is an extravagant amount, but who cares, because that's the way Mr. Grip rolls. And we go off to where the Dragon Youths made their camp. Naimh, Oisin and Callon had already searched it, couldn't find anything, but using complex trollish magics, I find that they had in fact buried their treasure. I uncover the treasure. It's quite substantial, but I'm obviously looking for something because I cast a number of detection spells, but I can't find it. But what I do find are 2 daggers, obviously lunar make and obviously ceremonial. So, and I also find a magic crystal. So I eat the crystal because, well, that keeps it safe, doesn't it? Stash the 2 daggers and basically tell the rest of the players to load the rest of the sacks and chests onto the horses, and we take it back to Apple Lane, where I then take all the sacks and the chest and take it off somewhere else for other things, other reasons, trollish business, which I really suspect the rest of the party is starting to get sick of me saying. But one thing we also did see at the bandits' camp was a bunch of trollish footprints, in particular trollkin footprints, which again is obviously leading us back to Rainbow Mounds. So that's where we finish play. The players then, we have a bit of a discussion about what we're going to do next, because it's basically 2 things. One, that we could do a quick raid on the Rainbow Mounds, but the other one is whether or not we were going to escort Gillette to Boldholm and witness his elevation to Rune Lordship. So basically we decide we haven't really got time to do the attack on the Rainbow Mounds. Mr. Grip doesn't want to do it because he wants to prepare for it. You know, he's got some tricky things up his sleeve, but he needs time to organise and sort that. So let's just all go to Boldholm and take part in Gillette's installation as a sword. That's what we decide to do, and that's where the game finishes. There is a bit of a postscript, however. Over the next day or so, a couple of days, Ox, as he does, goes around and talks to the different players and sort of gets a bit of a feel about you know, how the game went and what the players would like to do with their characters. And somewhere along the line, someone brought up the idea of lottery swords. And for those who don't know, what a lottery sword is that when initiates become swords of Humarked, they can take a gift and a guise. So instead of taking the gift themselves, if everyone agrees, if there's a group of them and they all agree to put their gift into the sword, and then they have a competition, and whoever wins the competition gets the sword with these gifts in. And so it could be 2, it could be 10. the individuals themselves keep the geese, the sword gets the gifts. And so that was thought to be a really good idea. And what would be even cooler would be that if the competition would be a duel, and us players, since we've got nothing else to do, our characters got nothing to do in this during the ceremony of elevation as into sword status, we will play the other Humakti. So Ox told us to roll up a Humakti character using the rules as said, and the criteria is that they have to be of sword status. They need to be able to legitimately become a sword of Humakti. And so that's what we've done. And so our next session, which is actually going to take place tomorrow, will be involved largely with this great duel between Gillette and the rest of the players playing these Humakti want-to-be swords. And so really what it comes down to is tomorrow is Bloodsport, and I'm so looking forward to that because I've got my character rolled up, and yeah, looking forward to seeing. He's got some cunning things to him, and I'm looking forward to seeing how well he plays against everyone else. So I'm going to call it there. As I said earlier, it seems the shorter the game sessions, this was only about 4 hours. The longer my recap, this is 41.5 minutes. If you're still here at the end of it, thank you so much for your perseverance, and I will do my absolute utter best to make the next one a nice short one, under 20 minutes, but don't hold me to that. Catch you next time.